If you were on Tumblr in the 2010s and also in a niche subcommunity of everything anime and were also a quote, social justice warrior, which was a term every other social media platform used to deride Tumblr's user base, you probably were around for the insane blow-up of Mystic Messenger around 2016. You could probably write a college thesis about this game and its effect on everyone, especially Kin Tumblr, but instead, I'm going to make a silly little video. Partly because it means I won't have to leave a bunch of citations in the description box. Anyways, let's get into it. A retrospective on Mystic Messenger. So before we discuss its relative popularity, it's necessary to describe what Mystic Messenger is in the first place. Released on July 8th, 2016, Mystic Messenger is a mobile otome game created by Korean company Cherits with the slogan, Makers of Games for Women's Happiness. Basically, they're solely an otome game company, and Mystic Messenger isn't actually their first game. They released a visual novel in 2012 called Dandelion that saw our heroine dating cat and rabbit boys with an even more supernatural twist. So this isn't their first go-around when it comes to otome, but I assume the shift to mobile is so that they can utilize microtransactions to make a more decent stream of income, considering Dandelion wasn't exactly an earth-shattering release in this already small market anyway. In contrast to most other mobile otoge, Mystic Messenger's routes can be played 100% free. Whilst many companies lock choices behind microtransactions, or straight up have you pay a premium to access the rest of the game, Mystic Messenger simply time gates you. Hourglasses, the microtransaction, are a way to bypass the time mechanic as well as paying a small flat fee to unlock the routes of Juminhan and 707. The time mechanic isn't exactly ideal considering it's tuned to a Korean person's general timetable, so if you play this game, you'll find yourself waking up at odd hours to progress people's routes, which if you have anything resembling a normal sleep schedule, you'll probably find yourself missing a few chats. Luckily, there's a buffer period, so it's not too punishing, but missing too many chats does get you a fairly generic bad end. The plot is pretty flimsily thrown together, but not many otome games have a reasonable introduction to begin with. As the main character, you're offered a job as a party planner for a charity organization, the RFA, and are taken to an apartment as well as given access to an exclusive chat app that allows you to communicate with the RFA's members, named V, Zen, Yu Sung, Jae Hee, Jumin Han, and 707. 7 for short. Or, spoilers inbound, his real name Sayong. They're all pretty bewildered by your appearance, but things eventually settle down. As for the greater plot, well, there's a cult, also secret agents and secret siblings. The absurdity hits very hard and very fast. If you're to compare it to other releases today, I don't think this game is particularly up to standard, nor would it gain a fandom to keep it around. Ordinarily, you would expect it to have a short burst of players and then quickly die out. But it's still alive is the thing. When I was combing through Tumblr posts for this video as my research, I checked a lot of dates for them, and more than a few of them were dated in 2022 and had quite a bit of notes. Not to mention this game is still getting updated periodically, which would not be happening if it didn't have at least some semblance of a player base. It's baffling, but if you participated in the culture surrounding Tumblr at the time, you can pretty easily isolate what happened. Now you may ask, was I a part of that same culture? Of course I was. As a small tween, and then a teen, I was already pretty well acquainted with otome games, mostly through reading people's blog spots and WordPress reviews. So hearing about Mystic Messenger meant I was going to play it immediately, and I had a pretty easy time getting through it. Other people, not so much. It's pretty agreed upon that the 2010s is when social media started getting more and more prevalent, as well as more centralized, and it's only increased in 2020 and beyond. So you have a bunch of shut-in teenagers and burnt-out college kids glued to their phones more than ever who have an intense interest in anime and anime-like art styles. They discover a dating sim where your love interests are constantly checking up on you. It's no secret otome is a genre that's gradually became more and more niche as it's aged. So for many people, this was a completely new and novel experience. They can make choices. There are different endings. They can self-insert if they want to. In their minds, they can even have the boys date each other, which managed to get a few ships popular on AO3. Not to mention there are still Imagine blogs running around that still very much update their content. The game kind of just hit a sweet spot of convenience since you didn't need to buy it, and forming a deep parasocial bond with you. I can't emphasize the parasocial aspect enough, by the way. Mystic Messenger's novelty was that periodically, your love interest would text and call outside the group chat function to check up on you. You could even call them directly at various times to have a spontaneous conversation. With proper suspension of disbelief, they quickly feel more real than any other fictional character. With that unique aspect to it, not much else really mattered. It's very arguable that the story was pretty mediocre and full of plot holes, as well as the art yo-yoing quality every so often from decent to just plain bad, but getting a phone call from 707 can make your day. So with explanation for its popularity out of the way, it's time to discuss how all the eyes on it managed to influence the game's trajectory pretty easily. You may notice, Jae-hee is a woman. She's not exactly a traditional lesbian route like you'd think, she's more so the bromance one, or at least was intended to be. Seeing the overwhelming warm reception to her caused Cherish to pivot a bit, and in the extra epilogue and holiday stories, there are implications that she and the main character are beginning to develop feelings for each other, which I think is an objective win for lesbians in an otome game. It's pretty rare, so it's nice to see them throw a bone to their gay audience. On top of that, we later managed to get 2 completely new routes that expanded on the story and got you 2 new love interests. But first, some minor backstory. See this character? You remember I called him 7. Well, his route was really well received. Astronomically so. It caused such an intense fandom to sprout up around him, even in comparison to the other love interests. He was relatable because he was the chronically online troll. He constantly cracked jokes, played pranks, and was generally tech-savvy. Not to mention his dark and mysterious past, and also the cross-dressing. To the average internet user, it was a match made in heaven. He had 2 people connected to him by virtue of being the true route, and that was V and Cyran. V had a big shroud of mystery behind him, generally being cryptic and not revealing plot-important information, and then basically disappearing by the end of each route. So obviously people would be interested in and want to date him. It is a dating sim after all. Now enter 7's twin brother Cyran, or before the big reveal, unknown. Having proximity to 7 already made people pay attention to him, but his storyline and the way he was turned against his brother made people sympathetic and also want to date the villain route. And date the villain route is what they got. Because Cherish implemented an all-new story with a different common route that led to you finally getting to have a happy and sort of healthy relationship with V or Cyran by the end of it. I cannot understate how much these route implementations caused a resurgence, because Cyran had everyone in just as much of a chokehold as his brother did. In my case, he was also one of my favorites, but I didn't care much for 7. I was more of a Jumin and Zen kind of girl. Possessive CEOs / salarymen and womanizers are my type. Now you could argue Cyran and 7 as well as all the other characters are pretty basic, easily digestible tropes, and thus there's tens of other games with similar characters. And that's true, but not if you don't have experience with this genre to begin with. This goes back to my earlier point about this being people's first dating sim. Everything was so shiny and new, and thus the reveals were shocking. On Jumin's route, you can probably see that he has all the makings of a yandere, but other people might be confused as to why he's asking them to get in a cage, and then be jump scared by a bad-end CG of Cherish's rendition of a BDSM relationship. That kind of stuff keeps the reader around, because for all intents and purposes, they've never really seen something that bold before. Or they're just into it. So they may want to see what the other routes could be like, and if things get just as crazy. And they absolutely do. So it's no surprise people got attached afterward. I think in this point of the video, it's important to talk about personal flaws I found with Mystic Messenger. Just because criticizing something I love is in my bones at this point. Remember when I said the main character was recruited as a party planner? Well, that was an actual mechanic in-game. Part of the requirement for acquiring the best ending, aside from getting someone's affection high enough, was answering emails from prospective party-goers that all had something eccentric about them. The thing is, answering these emails the correct way was needlessly obtuse and completely aggravating. You basically had to pull up a guide on your browser if you didn't want to completely flub some of the correct responses, considering they were pretty out there, and you needed a specific amount of people to show up to the party, otherwise you wouldn't get the ending you wanted. It was incredibly annoying because you had to do this every single route. Every single one. And the stakes were pretty high at certain points, so I felt ridiculous having to answer some email about ramen while my character was in active danger. Not to mention the hourglass income itself was pretty sparse, which left little room for error. I understand the reasoning behind it, mainly that Cherish isn't exactly a big company, so they can't afford to be as generous as some other mobile games, but that didn't make it any less obnoxious. I vividly remember when Cyran's route came out, I went out of my way to buy hourglasses so that I could more comfortably progress through things without missing too many chats, or at the very least being able to play them out when I was in danger of getting a bad ending. And regardless of what Chariots is doing now, as I said before, they're most certainly still updating the game, but they also seem to want to capitalize off of the text and calling based system they created and spawned a subsequent craze over via a game called The Zoom. This promised a more personal connection, giving you, by the site's description, 200 days worth of conversations with your possible soulmate. There are other mechanics, such as being able to access a private account he has that updates you as soon as you guys have a conversation, so you can reasonably assume all of these are tailored around the same idea of getting to know your love interest more intimately. The problem is, their advertising is pretty bad, it keeps getting delayed, and to a lot more casual fans, this kind of just sounds like a Mystic Messenger copy. You can probably ascertain the stark difference from Mystic Messenger is that the route in the Zoom doesn't truly end in a traditional fashion, considering the amount of conversations promised. But also this is a mobile game, so they have to make money, and that money is being made via a subscription service that gives a lot of perks that'll certainly make the game a lot more enjoyable. So much, in fact, that you feel like a peasant for being free to play. I mean, $23 a month to get access to a private account? That's a bit steep. To top it off, the team seemed to lose a staffer that caused them to delay the game to basically the back half of 2022. As of right now, there's no real release date, and it seems like they kind of buried any hype they may have drummed up in the time it took them to type up that post and hit release. I'm not attempting to defame the Zoom exactly. I genuinely hope it does well, and perhaps the free-to-play experience won't be as painful as it looks. But the issues surrounding it, despite Mystic Messenger still thriving, brings me to my final conclusion. Mystic Messenger was truly a viral phenomenon that may or may not be repeated later, but I'm leaning towards its fandom power not being replicated in this age of mobile games like Genshin Impact and other juggernauts being created and localized. Though all the reasons I listed out contributed to its fame, Chariots also just got super lucky. If this was released a year or two later, there's a possibility to have next to no traction internationally and be on the long list of Otoge end-of-service notices, especially with its frankly outdated art style and mechanics. Regardless, as a participant, I personally feel like it was really fun to take part in, and I look back on it fondly despite all the flaws and discourse. I'm glad they took the risk, and perhaps one day we'll see another dating sim boom that'll allow another Mystic Messenger effect to overtake us.